talking about before is you guys are actually making a major push now. This was announced, I think, Sunday, into the realm of research.
Yeah, that's right. And as a lot of you probably know, I mean, that's the area that that I've been working in primarily for more than 10 years, the scientific side of tobacco harm reduction. And so when I merged my research operation and myself into CASAA almost a year ago, part of the plan was to be able to turn CASAA into not just the very effective political lobbying and education organization that it was at the time, and of course still is, but also a major player on the research side, and we are finally acting to make that the case. We're in a really unique position with that, I think, because we now have the scientific capacity and the connections to move the research forward, and we also have the consumer advocacy perspective to recognize what bits of research are most desperately needed. So we're able to be very targeted with it.
Now, you talked about merging your organization or your work into CASAA's. Can you kind of give everybody what was your background as far as coming into this with CASAA?
Sure. Well, I mean, I was a professor of public health for most of my career, and for the last 10 years of that, I was focused on tobacco harm reduction, most recently at the University of Alberta. And the tobaccoharmreduction.org website was our work then. It's now part of CASAA. It's actually pretty much an archive right now. It's a few years out of date, but it's there if anybody wants to sort of poke around the history of tobacco harm reduction. And I think a lot of people right now who are new to THR, who are vapors who have successfully quit smoking using e-cigarettes in particular, aren't aware of the history so much. But a huge amount of the conventional wisdom about THR and how it works and why it works and so forth was developed by me and my research group, as well as Brad Radu, who is also still heavily involved. If you're not familiar with him, you ought to be. Yep. And sorry, that came out badly. So
no.
Let me rephrase that. To anyone listening who doesn't know the name Brad Radu, be sure to look him up too. But anyway, my research group was the biggest player in tobacco harm reduction research for several years. Among our contributions, those of you who are familiar with our mantra that it's 99% less harmful than smoking, that number came from a calculation that we did 5 or 6 years ago, and it's sort of become the conventional wisdom. So I've been at this a long time and laid down a lot of groundwork, and it's gratifying to see how much additional research is coming from all different directions these days, but there are still a few holes in it, and those are the ones that we're trying to fill.
Now, what brought you into the field of tobacco harm reduction research in the first place? I mean, were you a smoker at one point, or it was just like what was the background of getting into that?
No, I wasn't, and it was sort of a serendipitous encounter. I mean, I was a public health person. I was interested in, doing good research just because, I'm a science geek and that's what I like to do, and doing something important for public health. I ended up, stumbling into this, actually working on a court case that I was hired as a consultant to work on. I wasn't any more aware of the potential of tobacco harm reduction than the average person is today. I was quite shocked as I did the research for this to discover that smokeless tobacco, which was the crux of this case, that that the claims about it being unhealthy weren't actually supported by the evidence, and the evidence actually was much closer to showing it was risk-free than it was nearly as risky as people thought it was. This is back in 2001, of course, well before the invention of e-cigarettes, and it became pretty clear to me that of all the things that I could possibly do in public health, as long as I was going to keep my focus on the United States, the Western world, rather than going off to Africa, the only thing that seemed to matter, everything else was a rounding error, was trying to promote tobacco harm reduction. It's the same claim that of course you hear from the ants, but it became clear to me that there wasn't actually a way to try to do something to reduce the harm from smoking, rather than just to fight about it, which seems to be their preference.
Yeah, that is the. Now, before you started looking into this, were you a big believer of quit smoking and don't partake in anything nicotine related or tobacco related, regardless if it was smoking or not, or were you already leaning towards smoking being the big bad thing as associated with that, and not quite sure on everything else? Because I know, but most everybody I know who is anti-smoking is really anti-tobacco.
Yeah.
But just wondering from the thought process of you going into this, when you first went into this court case you were talking about, were you really of the mindset of being anti-tobacco, or were you already leaning towards being anti-smoking and recognizing there might be some good in taking a more moderate approach towards anti-smoking?
Well, I actually really had no idea about the potential for harm reduction. I guess honestly I hadn't given it much thought. If someone had asked me, do you think smokeless tobacco is as harmful, and I thought about it for a minute, it would be obvious that it wasn't. But the fact that it was so much less harmful, that it was approximately harmless. We of course know that, or suspect that it's not really harmless, but can't prove that. So I was sort of vaguely aware of there being a difference, but I didn't recognize how huge it was. Now, it turned out that a few years earlier, when I was working on my postdoc, I had been, around the edges of, working with the anti-smoking people, the relatively sane anti-smoking people. Ken Warner, it's a name you've probably never heard, because sort of once the ants really took over, they drove out everybody else. But I dabbled in it a little bit when I was working on my postdoc, and I basically came to the conclusion that there wasn't anything useful to be done.
Right.
That is, everything that was useful in terms of reducing smoking, other than declaring a police state, which I was always opposed to. I was always much more the libertarian, despite the fact that I was in public health. That everything had been done. So as big a deal as it was, I didn't see any reason to bother trying to work on it, because it was just a matter of people spinning their wheels at that point. Tobacco harm reduction, actually, at that time, the existence of the possibility was known. Brad Radu was already working on it then, but I just sort of missed that message. It was just so well hidden at the time. So it turned out to be years later that I came back to it. Had an interest in the topic, certainly, and only then discovered that there was something to be done.
Right. So, fast forward a few years, and so you've already started some research. You've already started amassing a pretty vast wealth of knowledge as far as how other tobacco products relate specifically to smoking, as far as risk of exposure to the person using the product, risk of exposure to the people who are around the person. A lot of this stuff really is, I imagine, is common sense when you really think about it.
Yeah, well, certainly the fact that there is a big difference, and of course there's no exposure for the person around you if you're using smokeless tobacco, and there's, turns out to be no exposure worth worrying about when you're using e-cigarettes. That of course is incredibly obvious. It's equally obvious that these smoke-free alternatives are going to be less harmful than smoking. What is not necessarily obvious just from common knowledge is quite how low risk they are, but we have the research to support that. And that research about smokeless tobacco sort of really became definitive about 1998, which I have the excuse that the first bit of my looking at smoking came before that, and when I came back to it, that it had really been pretty much decisively figured out. And so when I got into it, I mean, it was not necessary to do any research to determine that smokeless tobacco was far, far less risky than smoking. That was in the books.
Right.
Then the question became, what are we going to do about that now that we know it to be the case? And there wasn't actually very much anti-THR back then. The ants, the people that later became the ants, and they weren't really thoroughly as zealot as extremist as they evolved into being in this century.
Right.
At the time, but they weren't supporting it, but they weren't actively opposing it either. It's as the politics changed and as it started looking promising that they really came down on it.
Okay, so, and yeah, it's been noticeably, as smokeless tobacco, as electronic cigarettes have gotten more and more popular, that's when you started seeing a sea change in organizations like the American Lung Association, the American Heart Association, ASH, Tobacco Free Kids, all of these different groups that have been predominantly anti-smoking their entire existence, all of a sudden took a turn and really became anti-tobacco and anti-nicotine.
Yeah, well, I think they were pretty much always anti-tobacco. Those of us promoting smokeless tobacco-based tobacco harm reduction actually probably set the stage in a bad way for what you were just describing, because actually back in 2006 when I started making a big push in Edmonton, Canada, where I was at the university, to promote THR, to promote smokeless as an alternative to smoking, the pushback was already there. In fact, the supposedly anti-smoking people there, both in the government and in the NGOs, shifted all of their resources to being anti-smokeless tobacco in response to my initiatives there to try to get smokers to switch. It was actually the case that anti-smoking, the usual anti-smoking propaganda that you see everywhere, almost vanished. They replaced it with anti-smokeless propaganda, and it was at that point that it became apparent that a lot of them are actually more worried about THR than they are about smoking for some of the reasons that I discuss on the anti-THR lies blog. So.
Right. So, okay, so we've gone through all of that. Now, when exactly did you start developing a relationship with CASAA? And I know you worked with them for a bit before you actually kind of came on board with them and kind of enveloped your work into what they were doing. But how did that relationship develop initially?
Yeah, I don't actually remember what the first contacts were. I should talk with people and try to jog my memory about that. But sometime, so over the course of 2010, 2011, after I had left the university and was continuing with things, somewhere in there, I noticed CASAA and what they were doing, and how I thought they really had it right. They were organized, sensible, tactical, and that was it became first off, it became apparent that I had some some resources that I could help them in terms of building up the education and the information that they had, and that's how it got started with individual conversations about particular web pages and pamphlets and so forth. And it became increasingly clear to me that there was more potential there than me just feeding them bits of information. And it's a synergy. This is definitely not a one-way thing. Because the other board members, the most active members of CASAA, and of course, everybody's CASAA who signs up to be part of CASAA, but the ones who do most of the work provided the resources that I needed to just focus on the science and the education, while we worked together to provide the platform for doing that.
Right. Now, it's been recent that you actually came on board with them officially, correct?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I mean, it's been. You might know.
It was shortly before VaporCon, maybe a few months before. So early 2012, was it? I mean, I'm trying to remember back.
Yeah. That's about right. That's what I was going to say. I couldn't get it down to the exact month, but yeah, it was early 2012 that I started talking to them. I proposed to them that I could come on board officially and make my research efforts part of the part of the CASAA operation completely, and it's worked really well. As I said, it's been up until just now, when we launched the research fund and the projects associated with it, that the full potential of that came into being. But even before that, there was a lot of very effective work going on, where they helped me get things done, and I helped out with the bits that I do.
Right, and we have fact checkers in the chat room here.
Yeah, actually, I just noticed Julie said I joined the board in May of 2012, and so at that point, me joining the board was simultaneous with declaring my research operation in its entirety to be part of it. So Rachel found the press release too. Okay. So.
She's Johnny on the spot there with that stuff too. We got a couple of questions in the chat room. Actually, I guess people want to kind of expand on some of the things you talked about. Said you speak of resources that CASAA had gathered. Is there more detail you can shed on that, or is that just too much information to try to condense into 2 minutes?
Sorry, what's the question?
You had spoke about resources that CASAA at the time that you started work with them had been able to gather at the time. Is there like some detailed information you could remember from back then of what they were doing?
Sure. Well, I mean, it's what was visible. That is, CASAA had put together a very good educational website. It was a couple of years fresher than my website was at that point. It was in terms of both presentation and updated information, a great organization, able to keep up on the politics and the what was going on with the popular press. And of course, CASAA from the start, just by its very nature, was tapped into the CASAA consumer community, and that had always been my primary interest, even as I was working, in the ivory tower and everything.
Right.
But it was difficult. It was difficult to be as close in terms of both understanding and in terms of communication, to the community, from my position. And so, CASAA, being that at its essence, was a perfect opportunity for me.
Yeah, and like BSP said, I'm not sure the old site's live, so we can't go back and see what was on the old site. But I did post in the chat room for everybody to look at the printable material that they have currently on their website now, and that's an example of I'd been following CASAA, and I've actually been a member since I think right when or shortly after they formed, and like you said, they've always been good about having relevant factual materials to pull from for either talking points when you're talking to politicians or other scientists or friends and family. I mean, it was very impressive how quickly they were able to put this stuff together and have it really be above board, or as far as not being propaganda. In kind of a way it was propaganda, because we're trying to put forth the viewpoint. That's basically the basic definition of propaganda. But in this case, this was factual, information that really couldn't be glossed over as being just, a bunch of people who liked vaping putting stuff out. I mean, it really was kind of grounded in science what they were putting out. It
was very solid. It was complete. I mean, they, but it was a combination of people who, knew a lot of this stuff, but also, sort of understood when they needed to go talk to somebody who knew a bit more than they did, which is, of course, how I got involved in the first place. And I don't think I'm insulting Julie at all, because she said this to me more times than I can count. Here we were, that CASAA before me, sort of trying to do the best we can as non-scientists, trying to make sense of this science, and you can get it 90% right, 95% right, from that point of view. But the last little bit, just like any technical area of expertise, it's just really hard to get that last 5% right, unless it's basically what you have spent your whole life doing in terms of science. So. So we have a very effective division of labor. We have people who are absolutely amazing at dealing with the legal legislative side of things, the mass communication, the keeping up with the press and everything. And now we also have sort of well, I'll go so far as to say, the top level science, between what we have in house and the people that we now have access to also. So
right now, I just put up a link in the chat room to the new fundraiser launch page for the research. Let's get into that a bit. Now, up to date, there's been several studies performed with various focuses. On electronic cigarettes, their components or their effects on the body. And I know part of the thinking with this is that a lot of those studies are really abstracted out into specific areas. There's nothing that really shows the benefits of vaping over smoking. In as much as, how does it affect the whole person, or how, or what do we know about the components as they are in electronic cigarettes? I think that's what this is supposed to focus on first, is an examination of the typical chemicals associated with the ingredients in our e-liquid and what we're actually vaporizing and inhaling in our body, correct?
Yeah, well, I mean, to some extent, what you just described is a bit more ambitious than what we're taking on right now.
Okay.
But we hope to continue to be more ambitious. We're actually starting with something that's a little bit easier to deal with than the studies of actual biological effects, which are pretty spotty right now, and most of them are way too specific to be particularly useful. But one thing that we do know quite a lot about, we being sort of science as a whole, but it's hard to completely make sense of it, is just the chemistry, because the first step before asking the question, what do these quantities of these chemicals do to someone's body, is to ask the question, okay, what chemicals are we talking about and how much of them are there? And the killer propaganda from the ants side on all of this is the FDA saying ooh, there's these toxins and these carcinogens, and we hear that over and over again. I mean, you can't get any story out about this without that showing up. Well, it turns out that this study that the FDA did produced results that are basically the same as a dozen other studies that are out there, in terms of showing, there are trace bits of a few things that aren't good for you, just like there are trace bits of those in most everything. But how much is there really? And how can we make sense of all of these studies that looked at the chemistry of e-cigarette liquid or vapor? There are a bunch of them out there. They turn out to not show any reason for alarm, but it's difficult to make sense of that because they are, highly technical, complicated. Every one of them is a bit different and presents the results in different ways. So it's difficult to make sense of. It's even more difficult to get a good sound bite out of it if you're going to try to convince your town council not to ban e-cigarettes, or you're going to try to convince a congressman to not let FDA ban e-cigarettes.
Right.
And so that's what we're shooting for with this, and the project that we're seeking funding for right now, seeking funding from all of you guys who are listening, everybody else in the vaping community, and via that link there, there's ways to donate there, is to get an expert in environmental health. We have somebody lined up to do this once we're able to get the grant money together, to review all of these studies, put them in perspective of each other, that is, show the extent to which that they agree and disagree on the results, put the results in a form where they can be consolidated rather than being, very complicated, arcane results that are just sort of all over the place, and then put that in the perspective of what we know about the health risks from those quantities of those chemical exposures. And, we know going into this that with 95% certainty that the result is going to be that the studies show basically the same thing, and that same thing is that the chemistry says there's nothing to worry about.
Right.
But we know we all kind of know that, but even somebody like me, who is an expert in several sciences, but not specifically in environmental health, at least not to the extent of somebody who could actually write this paper. We know this, but it's still very hard to make sense of and summarize it. And so, we identified this as a crucial, a relatively easy, frankly, but crucial and missing piece of the picture. And that's the type of thing that we think we're in a position to be able to do, is identify these holes that are relatively low-hanging fruit in terms of how much it would cost to fill the gap.
Right, and this from what I've heard, and I think it's actually on this launch page too, but I can't remember, and it's like a lot of words there, so I'm not going to go through it and try to find it. This is just the stepping stone you guys are taking on to get into more detailed research down the road. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, we really hope that this research fund is going to take off, and it already has. We've gotten an enormous, gratifying amount of support in just a couple of days here, and so this is actually the second step along the way. The first step, we went ahead and just directly funded out of the existing CASAA funds, which was to hire somebody to be in charge of trying to collect all of the various vapor success stories. I mean, we all know the debate around those as to whether this really constitutes evidence and so forth. Well, I mean, it definitely constitutes evidence, but you can do a better job of packaging it and scientifically analyzing it to show that it's evidence. So,
right.
So step one was actually to move forward with the plan to gather that together. Step two is the chemistry review and summary that I was just talking about. And we certainly don't plan to stop with step two. We really think that we can get a lot done, and can get a lot done with relatively modest sums. I mean, we obviously are never going to be able to go toe to toe with the government in terms of the amount of money they can throw around, but we can be very strategic about it, and that's the plan. Now,
I do want to bring this up here for everybody that's listening, and we've got a couple of minutes here left, but I want to point this out with this particular research, because most all of the studies that have come out so far have been only accessible to a select few people who can afford to purchase the access to get to the details of them, which is quite prohibitive to the average person. And I believe those, if I'm not mistaken, those results, even if you pay to get access to them, you cannot take those results and give them to other people to look at. Is that correct?
Well,
you're not supposed to.
Well, I mean, you're not supposed to just distribute the paper. I mean, you can make use of the results. That's fine. I mean, you're talking to somebody here who is a fierce opponent of this closed publishing regimen. I actually was involved in open access publishing from its very early days. Started a journal and so forth back when I was a professor. As far as I'm concerned, take it, copy it, distribute it. But as you say, the rules say you're not supposed to do that. But I mean, that's only part of the problem. Step one is getting a hold of the paper. Step two is making sense of it, because there aren't very many of us in this community who, can really read much more than the conclusion statements that the author chose to tack onto their analysis. And oftentimes those are either out of utter sheer dishonesty, or out of attempting to spin it and make it seem more interesting than it really is, often not very representative. I mean, that's why we want to bring in someone who is not going to read the introductions and the conclusions. Is just going to look at the data and draw real conclusions from that. And so we face this problem. Sure, any of us can get one of these papers, one of the ones that draws the conclusion that there's nothing really much to worry about according to the chemistry, and read that off in front of a politician or a reporter or whoever we're trying to communicate with. But there's going to be somebody else there presenting one of the ones that has basically the same results in terms of the science, but is being spun in a different direction. And then, okay, one paper said this, one paper said that. What's it all mean?
Right.
Well, when we have this paper that puts them all together, and we can say, okay, yeah, well, this one took into consideration the one that you were just quoting from. Ms. Ants, who was testifying before me, but found that if you actually look at the numbers, it doesn't show what you're claiming it shows, and especially when you put it in the context. And to circle back around to your original point, we're going to make sure that this is open access, that it's available for anybody to use, that it's not buried behind some paywall. So.
Right, yeah, and that was the important thing about this, is the fact that you guys are going to be presenting everything to the public. There's going to be complete transparency on this. You're not going to hide any of the study materials that were performed. You're not going to hide, any of that stuff. It's just going to be out there and open for everybody to be able to consume. And I think that is probably my favorite part of this whole thing is, I'm into the science. I'm married to a person who majored in chemistry and math. She's got her master's degree in education. She's a chemistry teacher. She was the type of person that when I actually make my e-liquids at home, if I didn't do it per the laboratory method, she would kick my butt. So I've got a great deal of exposure to the chemistry side of this, and I'm excited to read that, but I'm really excited the fact that this is just going to be all open source. Thrills me to no end that you guys are taking this on, one, but two, you're not doing it to kind of keep that close to your vest. You're going to be sharing this to people who are on your side and the people who are not on your side freely, and that's just an awesome thing.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the only way that we're going to win these fights over the science is to do the best possible science. I mean, if we start trying to play the same games that the other side does of spinning and hiding and obfuscating, we're going to lose, because they're better at that, and they're also much richer. And so, what do we have going for us? We have the honest science going for us, and so that's what we're going to try to make unassailable and unignorable.
Well, I, for one, I can't speak for everybody, but I can probably safely assume that I'm speaking for most people. I'm very excited that you guys are taking this on. I've placed the link once again in the chat to the Research Fund Launch.html page that's on CASAA.org. Go there, read through the details. They've got a lot of good details there. There are buttons there. Now, keep in mind, this fundraiser, the money that's raised with this fundraiser is completely separate from CASAA's general fund that they use for funding the calls to action and all of the general things that the organization does. This is completely separate. And the money that's raised on this page through these means, I think they do PayPal, and then they also give an address at the very bottom for check or money orders to send. Those monies are strictly earmarked for these research projects that are going on. So don't think that if you've already donated to CASAA that, they've got my money already. This is a completely separate thing. So get out there and get it out there. And I just want to say, Dr. Phillips, thank you very much for your work. We do appreciate everything that you do. Before I forget, you guys, he has a blog that is about one of the most awesomest things you can read on the internet ever. I mean, seriously, there's some really good information out there. He exposes a lot of lies and hypocrisy in the anti-THR and anti-smoking groups, especially some of their loudest spokespeople. I've posted the link to that also, antithrlies.com. I read this constantly, so again, thank you very much for putting this together and doing what you do.
Well, you're welcome, and thanks for pointing it out to everyone. Yeah, on the anti-THR lies blog, I just finished something that's a little bit different, in which I was actually going through an analysis that, it was quite a few posts. It turned out to be about how to respond to questions about addiction, which I urge everybody to read, because it's an argument that comes up over and over again, and I think it's one we can totally win. And I sort of wrote a script for how to win it. And as of my next post, I'll get back to griefing the liars. But I was working on something else for the last week. So yeah, please go read that. But especially, please go to the research fund page and make a donation. As you know, everybody who is an enthusiastic defender of vaping, the types of people who listen to this show, if everybody can go and just donate $10 or $20 if that's what you have. We've gotten some bigger donations from people who are able to afford more, and that's great. But the numbers, a whole lot of $10-$20 donations are really helpful to us too. So please, everybody, if you can do that, please do.
Absolutely. Again, thank you very much for spending the time with us tonight. We really do appreciate it. And I want to extend an invitation to you down the road when this starts getting underway. If you want to come back and give us updates from time to time, how things are going, kind of keep us in the loop on everything you guys are doing with this, we really would appreciate it. I mean, we're trying to stay on top of this.
Yeah, certainly. And CASAA will be making every effort to keep all of our members and everyone else who follows us keep you posted on what's going on with this. But I would certainly be happy to come back on the show and talk about it, or talk about any of the scientific questions that if you want to go in that direction with a conversation too. Happy to do it.
Absolutely. It'll take me a couple of weeks of research to prepare for that, but I would absolutely love to do that sometime. Again, thank you for your time. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll talk again soon.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Good night. So there we go. Dr. Carl Phillips, Science Director of CASAA. Really super nice guy. I met him at VaporCon and loved talking to him. I didn't get nearly as much time to be able to talk to him as I could. And of course, we've got Julie, and I think I saw Ron floating around in the chat with CASAA also. So thanks, Julie. Thanks, Ron, for helping set this up. Do I have time for a song? It's 10:59. Let me see what BSP has to say about that. The song that I have, it's like 4 minutes long. You has time, do it. Rachel has said, I have time. I don't know if I can go against that or not. I'm just making sure. I know Dwayne, Almighty God, is scheduled to come in right after me here. But I just want to make sure. Okay, he says sure. I just want to step on any toes. So, okay, give me a moment and I will switch over. Okay. There we go. So, yeah, I promised you a song that had to do with love because it's Valentine's Day. But, it's King's X. I had to play King's X. So, anyway, it is 6 after 11. I've cut into AG's time already by 6 minutes. So, I'm going to bid you guys farewell and good night. Again, thank you, Dr. Carl Phillips, for joining me tonight. It was a wonderful conversation, and I look forward to more in the future. Thank you again to Julie and to Ron in the audience here with CASAA for helping keep the chat informed when I wasn't paying attention to it. And thank you to AG for filling in for Slipgator, who has been unable to come to the show tonight because of work commitments. Have a wonderful evening. I will see you guys here next Thursday night. Have a wonderful Valentine's Day, a wonderful weekend, and forever keep vaping. Good night.